Thanks for tuning in to the HR Uprising podcast. I'm your host, Lucinda. The HR Uprising is focused on helping forward-thinking people professionals deliver real lasting value in their organisations. I'm a chartered psychologist, speaker and trainer, and recently authored the best-selling business book, How to Be a Change Superhero. My day job is founder and CEO of software and training business Actus. This gives me the opportunity to work with other businesses like yours. We are focused on building a better workplace for people wherever they are located, with the help of our performance, learning and talent management software and our training and consultancy services. Every week on the podcast, I will be covering different topics and challenges, joined by relevant experts and real-life people professionals. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really hope you enjoy and get value from this week's episode. Hello and welcome to this week's HR Uprising podcast. And this week I've got a return guest that I'm delighted to have with me, Michelle Parry Slater from Kairos Modern Learning. You'll have heard Michelle before, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with her work. She's very present across lots of social media, and she's coined this term, the last 100 days, that we want to just focus in on today because I thought it's actually quite a relevant topic that we should be thinking about more. Michelle, do you want to introduce yourself for those who don't know you, and of course why we've gone for this topic?
Thanks for having me back. As you said, founder of Kairos Modern Learning, also author of the Learning and Development Handbook. And I know a lot of people will know me through that. And my podcast research from my next book, Learning from the Edges. And the reason that the last 100 days has come about is I'm currently working my notice to UK PLC because I'm leaving in September to go and live in Australia. And so I'm kind of working my last 100 days. And it occurred to me when I move and start my first 100 days, that is really all we ever talk about. We only ever hear people talking about the first 100 days. And it got me thinking, what does the last 100 days need to look like? And why don't we talk about it?
Yeah, and when we think about it, actually how someone exits an organisation makes a massive difference in terms of how successful the next person is. In a smaller organisation, you can leave a huge vacuum. So it's really important to help people leave well, if you like, isn't it, in terms of that? And we'll perhaps explore what that is. But I suppose going back to your sort of first 100 days, I guess it's about induction, isn't it? We focus very much on induction, just getting people up to speed, and sometimes it stops there. So this whole life cycle is what we're really thinking about here.
Yeah, essentially that whole employee life cycle starts with that brand awareness. And I think some of that brand awareness rubs off from the last 100 days, because if you've got people leaving with advocacy, people saying, oh, I'm really sad to leave this company, I really want to stay, but for whatever reason I can't. And so you've got that brand awareness piece that goes into your recruitment. Well, if you've got more people applying who are good quality candidates because they've got those Glassdoor reviews that say this is great, people only tend to do those review sites when they're really annoyed or when they're really happy. So why aren't we encouraging people to leave really happy and leave great reviews? So you go through the brand awareness, through the recruitment, and like you say, Lucinda, we head into induction. And personally, I think induction never finishes. It makes me feel a bit sad when people say, oh, we have a 6-week induction. You're not the finished article. You don't know everything there is to know about an organization in that 6 weeks or in that first 100 days. You're constantly learning, about trust, and you're building relationships. And then we may end up in a position where you feel pretty comfortable, you're in your stride. And then we come into this sort of performance part of the employee life cycle, where hopefully managers are having regular conversations about performance, regular conversations about you as an employee. But then it seems to sort of drop off a cliff. We don't tend to hear of people having beyond performance conversations, so sort of career progression conversations. And I worked with a client a number of years ago who was a career coach. And I have to say, in all my years of work, I'd never even heard of what a career coach was. And that's because it seems to fall away at that point. We sort of focus in on what are you giving to the company, performance, as opposed to what the company can also offer to you as an employee.
Do you think companies are scared sometimes? So let's say you're a smaller business, or you hear the expression, people talking about dead man's shoes. You have no intention of going anywhere, and people perceive that the only way is into your job, and so they're a bit scared to talk about career because the elephant in the room is there isn't anywhere for that person to go within that organization in theory. So they bury it down rather than facing it up and being a bit creative about it.
I totally agree with that 100%. And I think that especially in a smaller company, it's very comfortable, it works. Why are you going to rock the boat? But what we're talking ultimately about here is employee engagement and that whole experience of being in work. And even if you're in a comfortable job and you're happy with everything, eventually something will give. So you will get to the age that you're going to think about retiring, or you'll get to the age where you can't really afford to stay in that job because perhaps, I don't know, you need a bigger house and you need a bigger mortgage or whatever it might be. So change is ever present. You know this, you wrote a great book on change after all. Change is ever present, and yet I think it's artificial that we don't face into the reality that even if you're really comfortable in your job, even if you really love the people that you work with, nothing lasts forever. It could be an illness, for example, that takes somebody out of a job, and again, we're just not prepared for a life cycle within a role that sets people up for success, sets the next person up for success. So I just think we need to talk about it more. We need to talk about how do we move people through an organization? And maybe the answer is go away for a couple of years, go and get some life experience in a different company and come back to us. Yeah. Wouldn't they want to be doing that?
One of the businesses I worked for, often people would leave and come back. Sadly, it was to go and get more money, I think, because it was the quickest way to get a pay rise, they felt. But people did come back. And more seriously on that, one of the things that I found seemed to happen with people in my team, I often had somebody, I remember her coming into my team and I thought, gosh, she's got loads of potential. She's going to last in this role and she's going to outgrow it. And rather than ignore that, I kind of had the conversation about what does she want, where does she want to go next, and thought, how can we develop her with those skills so she feels like she's learning in direction of where she wants to go career-wise. And I think that if you face up to it, you can actually keep someone in a role for longer. I know 18 months to 2 years, possibly longer than someone who goes, okay, I've got this job, there's nowhere for me to go, I'm frustrated. So by focusing on projects and ways in which she was developing her career, I got 18 months more out of a high performer. And I think managers are sometimes a bit scared to do that. So actually face up to, where do you want to go? Okay, I get it. How can I help you get there and keep you for as long as possible, and then wish you well when you head off to your next career move?
What a great manager you were in that situation. I think that's really what I'm trying to encourage, because what actually happens is managers who almost like the ostrich that put their head in the sand and pretend that this person's going to be there forever, they're just not realistic. I mean, it's just not the real world that we live in. And what they're actually setting themselves up for is a future void, because that person will eventually get annoyed, they'll get frustrated, they'll outgrow the job, as you say, and they'll leave. And where's the business continuity? Whereas if we were having conversations that says, well, I kind of see myself in this job for a couple of years, I'm quite ambitious for something more, or, to be able to honestly say to your manager, do you know what, I'm easily bored. I think I'll just get bored if I do this for a long time. Are there any secondments that I could take in another department, for example? They don't have those conversations.
Helping people grow within that role, for sure, in the direction of their aspirations. It's just being a bit creative, isn't it, as well, in terms of that, like you say, it's a secondment or working with somebody in an area that's going to help you learn something useful. And the point that you're making, really, you made it about engagement earlier and about trust. For me, it is really a line manager building that personal relationship with the person and understanding what's going on for them. So we've talked there about career growth. You said also it could be something external or personal to them in terms of family commitments or earnings potential or whatever it might be. But if you're close enough to that employee that they're sharing that information with you, they're going to give you the heads up earlier. And that's got to be gold dust, because I don't know, most people are in a lot of people are on just a month's notice. More senior roles, maybe 3 months or 6 months is much rarer. And you can't recruit someone and train them up to be a performer in a role in 4 to 6 weeks. You just can't. So if you've got someone who'll give you that extra notice and help you, and then even hand over, one of our leavers, I'll give her a shout out in case she still listens, Helen, she used to help with this. We still listen to her video. She left probably 2 or 3 years ago, and she left these invaluable videos for how to use a bit of technology we have in the business. It's really hard to use. And every time my colleague listens to it, she goes, oh, thanks, Helen, for that little video. She sends her a little message on LinkedIn. And what a great example of a good leaver. She went to all the effort to really document and do those things. And that's because she had a great relationship with her line manager. And that makes a huge difference, doesn't it?
What you're talking about there really is this knowledge management piece. And actually, I think this is a really important part of leaving well. In my little sort of campaign on LinkedIn about my last 100 days, I'm using the hashtag as well, leaving well, because this is part of it. Like the knowledge walks out the door. And to your point, a month's notice, it is no time at all. Absolutely no time. I'm on day something like 77 or 76, and I feel like I just started this conversation yesterday. And so, this 100 days is flying by. In most organizations, I'd have already worked my notice. I'd already be gone.
Next week. Yeah.
And so where's the knowledge? Where's that information going? So there's 2 points to this. If you're having regular conversations about career progression, if you're having regular conversations around potentially people leaving or moving on to something else within your organization, you'd be more tempted to capture that knowledge. You'd be more tempted to think, well, it's really important that that person shares with us, how do they do that thing? And we should be doing that. I mean, knowledge management often hasn't sat within learning and development over the years. It's sat elsewhere in a business. And so do we even have the connections of the dots between HR might know you're leaving before your manager? Your manager might not necessarily know. And so when do knowledge management get involved in it? So these are the reasons why I just want to sort of highlight this conversation, because I have to say, the time is zipping by. I'm going to be on an aeroplane before I've even said goodbye to everybody, which I think brings us to a different angle, which is the emotion of leaving. Now, I appreciate I'm leaving in quite a dramatic fashion here. I'm going to the other side of the world, and not everyone necessarily would be doing that. But I think by not talking about leaving well, we are denying people the emotional roller coaster that is choosing to leave a company. Because the minute that notice period starts, that individual has gone on a huge journey to get there. The fact that they've decided this job isn't for them, the fact that they have felt so compelled to look for another job. And I know it doesn't work this way in all areas of business, but the secrecy of calling in sick because you've got an interview, rather than actually saying, as they do, for example, in the education field, where you have to get a reference pretty early on and you tell your line manager, I'm going to go and get another job. I think they've got it right in teaching. They're much more honest about it, which means the emotion of it is dealt with very differently. But we have in private business, especially, we have this secrecy around leaving. And this creates a whole pile of emotions that we just don't have the opportunity to express or discuss or work through in an open and transparent way. And I just don't think any of that's healthy.
And a lot of what you're saying there, because if you haven't been able to be upfront because you haven't had that open relationship with your line manager and the process isn't like it is in education in private sector, you've almost had to break trust, if you like, to go and apply for those jobs. And so by the time you then have the job, you hand your notice in, the relationship is, the emotion is there in terms of, do you feel that you've broken trust in the relationship, or is it something that's there's going to be more emotion in terms of what happens next, and maybe you feel guilty, so you've been through the change curve and you're committed to the future, but line manager hasn't and your team hasn't, and they've only got 30 days to get their head around it. So all of those, none of that works really. Whereas if you can give someone a heads up that it's time for me to outgrow, say nothing of the fact that we should be doing this anyway, and it shouldn't be about money or counter offers, things like that, but maybe the manager could go, well, actually, we could get you a secondment, or how could I help you, or how could I keep you? They could genuinely understand what is driving that change, if it is something that they could do something about, rather than it's too late by the time you've got that job offer, isn't it, really?
You've
gone.
I agree. I think it's too late by the time you actually start looking on LinkedIn at the job section as opposed to the post section. It is too late. And that's why I just want to really encourage people to, I'm not talking about be best friends with the people you work with. That's not what this is, but just be more aware of what is the future for your team, what is the future for the individuals in your team, because sometimes the shoe is on the other foot and the business wants to change, and then we end up in a redundancy conversation. But actually, how much easier is a redundancy conversation if you know that that person has said to you, well, I think I'm going to retire in 3 years' time, or actually, I'd like to be a manager of people in 5 years' time. You can start to strategize about your business much more fruitfully if you've got that information to start with, as opposed to, okay, everyone, shock horror, we've decided to take the business in an entirely different direction and your jobs are all at risk. It is what you say, it's breaking trust. The employees feel bad, the employer feels bad, everyone's feeling bad. Well, why aren't we just having honest conversations? If I look at it from me putting stuff out there about last 100 days, about leaving well, people have been generously kind. People have privately messaged me, and I know people in Australia, can I help you with that? And I just think that there is so much goodness and kindness in humanity that I think it would be the same if we could encourage a different conversation in work rather than this secrecy and this guilt and that kind of difficultness of leaving.
How do you think it plays into sort of succession planning, where as a process or something active? What would you think about whether businesses should do more of that or do it differently?
I feel about succession planning the same way I do about high potentials. Everybody's got potential. Everyone's got could be a successor for somebody if they're interested in that. Now, how do you know? And you only know if you have open and honest conversations about what their career progression might look like. The individual themselves might have no clue of their own high potential or their own potential for success. And so encouraging them, I mean, I know I've been encouraged along the way by directors I've worked with who've seen in me things that I haven't seen in myself. Had they not voiced it, perhaps I wouldn't have had the ambitions that I'd ended up having. So I genuinely think that high potential, succession planning, future of your business, not creating a void, business continuity, it's all about great conversations, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I was thinking that whole sort of, if you talk to someone about, so what is their potential, what might they want to do, where might there be succession opportunities, you're showing that you are not keeping them in a box, you're open to them, their growth and development, and you're not going to hold them back. And that's just got to be a good thing. And then you can develop people in line with those things, which is better for the organization and for the individual. And also businesses are changing so quickly. I think actually quite often there are roles that could appear if you're talking to someone early enough, or if you know that that person has an aspiration to get into a certain skill set or others. You mentioned secondments. How can we help people add value to the business in a direction in which they think they're interested, and just keep the growth going, which is good for everybody.
I actually am going to pin some of the blame of these lack of conversations on my fellow L&D professionals. Won't particularly be a popular part of your podcast, I'm sure, but I think we're at fault. As L&D professionals, we're at fault because we're not asking the right questions. We're just order takers and we're training people as we're told to train people, as opposed to really being part of an ongoing conversation about the growth of the organization or the direction, the strategic direction. We're not linking the offer that we create back to that strategic intent. We're not really understanding why are we putting Bob on the third sales course of the last 3 years, as opposed to saying, do you know what's not working for Bob? Why are we really, just sort of trotting this stuff out? And I think if we ask those difficult questions, which may help a conversation with a manager and an employee that they, for some reason, can't have themselves, but for as long as we just keep taking orders and keep trotting out Bob on another sales course, I think we're partly at fault. But then I'll also lay, this is the manager's door. Where's the integrity that they have for actually managing people? Often they're put into a people management role because they're technically brilliant. And we all know that technical brilliance and people management are different skill sets. So there's blame everywhere. focusing on solutions, I suppose. I'm now feeling guilty because I've just been so rude to so many of my peer group. But that the solution really is just have better conversations in work. Just have better conversations.
The classic thing, I mean, I know engagement being a buzzword, but when you think about one of the questions of engagement is, I understand. I feel like I'm understood as a person. I know you feel that the manager just knows you beyond your day-to-day tasks, jobs, and activity. They know if you've got, your husband's out of work, or you're squeezed in terms of your family. They know the other things that are going on for you, and they empathize with them. But therefore, they can see that things may need to change, and maybe you can make adjustments in your existing job, whether it's a flexibility or whatever it is, and maybe you can't. But because you're understanding that person more widely, it's not a transactional relationship. You say you're having better conversations that go beyond transactional, then that is going to help you retain people, or it's going to help you have more notice so that you can help people leave really well, which is good for them, and it's good for you, and it's good for your team and the business.
I mean, just imagine if everyone knew, I don't know, 3 or 6 months in advance. I mean, formal notice is 30 days, but there's nothing to stop somebody in a great relationship with their manager to say, look, you know what, by the end of the summer, I think I'm done here. And it's only May, and we've got a few months to lead into this. What can we do to make this work for both sides? I think that would be, or should be, just normal.
Again, it's high trust, isn't it? Thinking about it. So why wouldn't someone on 30 days notice do that? Quite likely because they don't trust that they wouldn't be booted out earlier. I don't know what they would be concerned about, but certainly.
Well, some of the research that's popped out from me sharing about me leaving, and the stories that people are telling, are really interesting in that particular space. And some of the reason for that is because of the disloyalty and the trade secrets. You're going to steal stuff.
Oh, yeah.
You're going to take things away. And so people have talked to me, and a lot of these messages have been private messages. They've not wanted to publicly post on LinkedIn or Instagram where I've been sharing. And they privately said, well, I got put on garden leave. When I said, I'm going to give you notice, I instantly got marched off the premises. And yet I thought I had a really great relationship with my manager. I thought I was helping them, about me leaving well. And that just made me so sad that we're all replaceable at the end of the day. Even if we think we've got great relationships, we're all part of the system. We're all part of the machine. And I just think the machine is not trusting enough of people, and valuing us as individual humans. We're just a sort of cog in the machine. And that just, really spurred me on more to start this conversation, because that's just not healthy. You mentioned it earlier, businesses are moving fast. The world changes so quickly. We need to be able to morph our workforce in a way which is responsive to the changing parameters. I mean, we're coming up in the UK to an election. That's going to change things. The economic situation, that's going to change things. The geopolitical situations, they're all changing things. And so do we have the skills? Do we have the right skills in place for us to be able to be, I don't even want to use the word agile, but that's the word of the day, isn't it? Everyone's talking about agile businesses. And so actually to be able to say, well, what if I was to go away and get better digital skills in a different company and come back? Or what if I was to, for example, go on a secondment in the finance department to really understand how they tick, because that will help us when we service financial product to our clients. This just creatively thinking about how do we sustain business in a way which in the past has just relied on trust.
I mean, the garden leave thing's interesting, isn't it? That is, again, a trust or not trust. It really used to, I was thinking about that happening in sales jobs when you were going to a competitor. That's probably the only time, leave your keys and give me your car keys and marched out the building, that kind of thing. I don't know, is it still like as common as it was? Is that what came through from the people talking to you?
It seems to be reasonably a common thing, yeah. Certainly in the UK, less common in other locations, but they tend to have shorter notice periods in other countries. So we tend to have in the UK this 3 or even 6 month for senior roles, and it seems a bit of a farce because they give their 6 months notice and then they're out the door before you can breathe. So why have 6 months? You're paying somebody to not be in the business. how much more sensible is it to pay somebody to hand over well, to continue that high trust relationship until the end? And I think part of this is because we enable relationships to go sour before people give their notice. They're already lost them when they give you in that resignation letter.
And of course, if that's happened, they've already taken all the customer contacts.
Oh yes.
Not everything they needed before they told you, right? So
yeah, exactly that.
Nothing.
Yeah. I mean, so we just need to get better, I think, in that middle part, that performance, where instead of focusing just on performance, which serves the business, we need to focus on the personal as well, the progression, which services the individual. And I think when we keep those in balance, then leaving well just becomes part of the way we do things around here. Or maybe I'm just imagining and I'm hoping, and I'd love to hear from your listeners off the back of this podcast, who's doing it well, who is leaving well, who is focusing on the last 100 days.
I've got to say, we've had people who've left us on the whole. We've had some great leavers, and again, it's interesting as a small business. It's about high trust, and it's being realistic that you cannot keep everybody forever. We talk about, we have a career aspirations bit in our system, and one of the things is asking people what motivates them and what's their goals as well, because motivation can make a difference. Someone's massively motivated by growth or aspiration. Just knowing those things as a line manager can help you recognize where you've got a gap, or where that person is going to outgrow it, or actually they're not. If they have stability, maybe they're not going to go there. But I suppose one of the things I was going to, I thought maybe for us to almost draw a conclusion on is, do you think there's an optimum? Because you mentioned 6 months, and I think also you can be working, assuming you've not been put on garden leave, you can have too long an exit as well. Yeah. That people get, I'm done, right?
I agree. Because it goes back to motivation. All of this goes back to motivation. So, for example, if you are motivated by high growth, high excitement, and then you get to a period of stability in a business, you're instantly demotivated. And it's hard to keep going. If your adrenaline is the kick in from the startup phase, then the chances are you're going to be gone. And yet keeping somebody in that transition to stability when they're motivated by high growth startups phase, it's ridiculous to keep them around, because actually they start to suck the happiness out of the room and they start to spiral downwards. So there is definitely something in what is the optimum. Now, I actually thought last week, I was thinking about, well, what do I want to talk about now in terms of first 100 days? I'm not posting every day about this. It's just as things happen. And because for me, the last 100 days, I should say, the last 100 days postings are really focusing in on me leaving the UK PLC, me relocating and the global mobility angle, but also me leaving potentially, and I don't know yet, my business, Kairos Modern Learning. Am I going to carry that on in Australia? I don't know. And it occurred to me, because I've got lots of things to say about it, but have I got 100 days of things? No, actually, it's too long. Because my thinking about leaving the UK started way before 100 days. And I think that this is what's key. We need to catch people before they start looking on LinkedIn, before they start asking around who's got jobs going.
Yeah.
And so there's sort of two critical time periods. There's the notice period, and then there's also the pre-notice period. And for me, I think this last 100 days is that. It's knowing that your people are a flight risk and being realistic about what you can do about it, which is absolutely critically crucial. And then letting them go. Yeah. Because in truth, I would say now, apart, we've sold our house, we're looking at new roles, we're sort of ready. You know what I mean? We could be on a plane in the next couple of weeks. We're just saying our goodbyes to people, but we're not going for another 2.5 months. So this is going to drag for me. And I liken this to how it is if you're working out your notice. And I've been on 3 months notice previously, and I've worked out my notice, and my integrity has kept me working right up until the last day. But I've also watched other people work their notice, where their lunch breaks get longer and longer, and their work gets sloppier and sloppier. So there's just this balance, and it comes down to just genuinely having good conversations. Letting people go early, I think, is actually useful.
Especially if it's one of those things, if they can do useful stuff. I think they start to lose interest if they feel they're not able, someone's leaving with integrity, if they're not able to do more handover notes, or can they hand over physically to somebody. Once they've done those things, it is like allow them to kind of go. But it's having that process in place where you've got the people to hand information to, or whether you can hand someone else in the team, or whether you even have the luxury of recruiting someone to have a handover to. I mean, that is your absolute ideal. But
it is the ideal. Do you find this though? I see this a lot, that people are not involved in the recruitment of the next candidate, the next person in their role. And I think some of this becomes self-fulfilling because they're annoyed, they're frustrated, they're leaving because something's not gone well, and they're not leaving well. They're taken away from potentially almost poisoning the mind of the next person coming in. Yeah. But if we do this properly, they are the best person. They are the best person to be involved in recruitment. And so many organizations have a policy that says that they may not be involved in the recruitment of their successor. And I think it comes from a place of negativity. I think it comes from a place of mistrust, that if you're leaving, we can know you're no longer on our side. And my whole thinking around the last 100 days is we must get people to leave with advocacy. We should be seeking that Glassdoor review, not from the people who are frustrated because of the extremes. You know, I'm really annoyed, therefore I'll put myself out on Glassdoor, or I'm really happy. Why aren't we seeking happy advocates when they leave? That would be an ideal scenario. They've been involved in the recruitment. They've handed over well. They feel like they've got a legacy and left a legacy. We all know, of course, that legacy is only as long as the memories of the people around you, and it's soon gone. But that's the nature of business. Business moves forward. Things change. And I just think we are artificially not embracing that change.
Kind of an abundance mentality rather than a scarcity mentality, isn't it? Having that high trust, high advocacy. I think it's a great topic to have touched on. I suppose just wrapping up, Michelle, because you're more than capable. Normally I do a summary, but I think you're more than capable of doing a summary of what we think key take-homes are, and any just top tips to either line managers or HR listening to this.
So for HR, I'd say look at your employee life cycle and put as much effort into the end as you do into the beginning. And for many people, the focus is on that sort of brand awareness, recruitment and induction. They then leave the performance piece to the managers, and then who's looking after the leaving. So I would suggest HR need to, sort of step into that. I would also summarize for L&D, ask the questions that potentially others feel awkward about asking. Do something with the exit interview information. It's a rich source of data for L&D. If people are leaving, there's a problem. And if there's a problem, we can perhaps help there. And I think ultimately this does come down to managers. Do you know who's a flight risk? And if you don't, why don't you? Do you know what the career aspirations and progression looks like for the team? And let's just be super realistic about having those types of conversations. And ultimately, let's just help people leave well.
Absolutely. And so I hope you leave the UK well, and I'm not going to say this is the last time you've been on the HR Uprising. There's no reason why with modern technology we can't have you on again from Australia. It just might be slightly different times of day. But thanks for joining us once again. It's on the HR Uprising podcast, and we'll put links to your books and your podcasts and everything as well in the show notes. Thanks, Michelle.
I really hope you found this week's episode useful and enjoyable. If you did, perhaps you could recommend us to a friend or colleague, or give us a review on your platform of choice. It really helps new listeners to find us. Now you can access links to any of the information mentioned in this show via the website www.hruprising.com. Further free resources are also available at www.actus.co.uk. There you can also find out more about our software and training solutions. Finally, why not join our LinkedIn group, the HR Uprising, to share ideas and collaborate with other like-minded people professionals. Thank you for listening to the HR Uprising podcast.